So I've got a bunch of super tips which have really worked for me over the years in terms of growing really good, robust, nutritious organic fruits and vegetables. And the first one is like people, plants have personalities. Vegetables have personalities. No, we don't always like to pander to human personality because for various reasons. It's a good idea to get to know your vegetables and to pander to their personalities. And it's largely to do with where they came from, the parent soils, where the plants originated from. So I'm just going to go through a few of them. And I like to contrast beetroot and carrots because they're both root vegetables. They're grown a similar time of year and sown in early spring, harvested in summer. Beetroot likes a lot of encouragement. It likes fresh compost. It's very tolerant of it. Whereas carrots, well, they don't really. Carrots don't like fresh compost because fresh compost usually has a lot of nitrogen and the roots will go hairy. They're very tolerant vegetable. They'll tolerate quite reasonably poor soil, but they do need nurturing. And this is something I've used over carrots for 5 years, and I absolutely swear by it. And it's microclimber or frost cloth. It's a very fine synthetic cloth that you put over the carrots after they've emerged, after you've sown them. And what it does is it stops the carrot rust fly. And the carrot rust fly is a real pain in Canterbury because it flies close to the ground, and it lays its eggs quite close to the junction between the soil and the top of the foliage and where the foliage starts in the plant. And the larvae hatch and they burrow down into the carrot and they burrow through it and they eat little rusty holes right through it. Well, this stuff stops it in its tracks. You'll have clean carrots forever, and it lets the light through, it lets the water through, and it just lifts up as the carrots grow. It's great stuff. It'll last 5 to 7 years, even longer if you look after it and if you buy good quality microclimber. And they often sell it at your local Mitre 10 or something. By the way, you can get rubbish microclimber that's like tissue paper, so always test it first, pull it, make sure it doesn't rip easily. Corn I think of, corn's always hungry. Corn to me is like a hungry child that's always wanting more and more and more. It's a very big feeder of nitrogen, and it gets lonely. It needs planting in groups. It's a lonely plant, and the reason for that is most vegetables are insect pollinated, but corn's wind pollinated. So if you plant it in long strips, well, you're going to get the pollen growing everywhere but amongst the plants. So plant it in a big group. Don't plant any less than a dozen at a time. Personally, I wouldn't plant any less than 20 at a time. And it's a big feeder of nitrogen. And when you're thinking about nitrogen, it's important to understand how nitrogen behaves in the plant. So when the plant matures, it sends all the nitrogen in the leaves and the body and the stem to the seed. Now, with a lot of vegetables, you're not eating the seed. You know, broccoli, cauliflowers, you're eating the flower. The corn, you're eating the seed, and you're eating tons of seeds. So you've got to make sure the plant's getting lots of nitrogen. And I'll talk about nitrogen a bit more a bit later. Cucumbers, zucchini and celery like lots of water. Seems obvious, but the number of times in the tunnel house I've grown cucumbers, I've forgotten about them for a week, I go in, they're all shriveled up. I give them a massive boost of water for a couple of big drinks in a week and they'll just swell right up. And celery, in fact, it's originated as a swamp plant, so it likes moisture, it doesn't like drying out, and swamps are very fertile soils, so it likes a lot of nutrition, it likes a lot of feed. Tomatoes, what can I say about tomatoes? They don't like getting wet, and what I mean when I say that is they don't like the foliage getting wet, and they don't like the flowers getting wet, because when the flowers get wet, you interfere with the pollination. The bumblebees come in and pollinate tomato plants. The flowers are wet, they can't get at the pollen very easily. And also, if you water the foliage, you encourage fungal diseases on the leaves. So always water tomatoes at the base of the plant. It's really important. Tomatoes also need water to distribute calcium through the plant. And there are two different kinds of nutrients in plants. There's mobile and immobile. So mobile nutrients, the plant can actually grab nutrients from its oldest leaves and pull them to the growing tips, the most important part. But in mobile nutrients they can't. They can't distribute it in the plant without lots of moisture and water to help move those nutrients about. And calcium's an immobile nutrient, so it needs that water. And what you'll see with tomatoes, it's quite common, is you'll see white or black spots developing on the tomatoes. Well, that's a calcium deficiency. It's called blossom end rot, and it's more likely due to not enough watering than actual calcium deficiency in the soil is relatively rare. But you know, if you're watering it and you're still getting that, sprinkle some lime flour around the base of the plant and water it in, and you'll get some calcium into the soil that way. Eggplants like to sweat, they like it hot, hotter the better. I had great failure with eggplants in the tunnel house last summer. I grew some great, well, not great, they were pretty slow growing, but they looked okay and they produced flowers. They didn't pollinate, the flowers fell off and they didn't produce any fruit. And I've talked to a number of friends who grow, and this has been happening to them in recent years as well, and we're all sort of scratching our heads wondering what's happening. And all I can do is go back to the situation where I grew a fantastic crop of eggplant at Hohepa Farm, Canterbury, about 4 years ago. And it was in the glass house where it had tremendous amounts of sun, tremendous amounts of heat. My tunnel house didn't. And that's the sort of conclusion I'm starting to draw on that. All vegetables like to be with their friends, so it helps them adapt to the environment around them, so lots of companion planting. It's nature's pest control, really. Polycultures, mixing, you don't have to plant strips of this and rows and that, or that can be good for crop rotation and soil management, but mixing them up as well is good. Kind of depends on your personality a bit too, I think. And you have to be aware of a good fit, like vegetables that follow each other. If they all draw down on the same major nutrients, like carrots followed by beetroot followed by pumpkins, they all like a lot of phosphate. Well, a lot of vegetables like a lot of phosphate actually, but you're going to have to be aware of putting that phosphate back in. I'll talk more about phosphate in a minute because New Zealand soils are quite deficient in it. Potatoes, I think, are being quite sort of persistent, pretty hardy, pretty hard to get rid of actually once you've planted potatoes in the garden. They all grow almost anywhere in almost any soil. In fact, they're quite good for breaking up clay soils initially. But they do like a lower pH. They don't like overwatering, and that's to do with potato scab, which is pretty common on potatoes. And in terms of organic management, the best thing you can do for that is potatoes like a more acid soil. And, well, I should say potato scab likes a more alkaline soil, so you keep it acid and you reduce the prevalence of scab. And also the more you water, the more you encourage scab. So I know growers who don't even water their potatoes until they're just starting to flower, and then they put the water on. All vegetables like change. That's about crop rotation and managing soil disease. I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. And like people, plants need a strong foundation to thrive in the world, and that's really about the soil. So almost without exception, if you've got problems with your plants, if you've got discoloration of the leaves, if you're getting crazy problems with pests, you should always go back to your soil first and foremost. Now, I'm not going to explain all this. This is a nitrogen cycle and it gets quite complex. But the most important thing, it's really important to understand the way nitrogen behaves in the soil for growing organic vegetables, because the management of it is very different to conventional growing, where they just pump on urea-based fertilisers and they treat the soil as a medium to hold up these soluble fertilisers. In organics it's very different. What's important to understand is that when you have minerals that go into the soil is largely negatively charged, so there's millions of little soil particles, and the surface of them is all negatively charged. Most minerals are positively charged. They go into the soil, they lock on to those soil particles, ready to be transported to plant roots when the time's right. Maybe soil.